This time I want to talk about a type of sword with a remarkably protective guard, the Scottish basket-hilt broadsword or backsword. This one here happens to be a backsword made by Hanway. The difference is that the backsword is single-edged, has a blunt spine, whereas the broadsword is double-edged. This is a lot of hand protection. It wraps all the way around from one side to the other so that the hand is completely hidden in there. It could still be potentially vulnerable to a thrust from a rapier. It would have to be quite a narrow blade to even slip in there, but here, for example, it could get in. On the inside you have some padded cloth here just to make it more comfortable so the hand doesn't rub against the guard. I can't fully judge just how historically accurate this reproduction is. The overall shape and design seems very, very similar to the pictures that I've seen from museums, but there could be some finer details that are a little off. The balance is really quite close to the hilt, and that's very noticeable as you're handling it. In fact, I would even say this handles almost like a side sword or even a heavy, very short rapier, but I imagine there are probably also more cutting oriented basket-hilt swords that are balanced a bit more forward for more powerful cuts. This one here I've done some test cutting with. It doesn't cut remarkably well, but that's mainly because it has a typical Hanway edge. So it's laughably dull. So you can't really judge based on that. But let's talk a bit about the hand protection in particular. So you might be wondering, why didn't they come up with this earlier? Because a larger, more protective guard is better, right? Well, yes and no. There are a few factors to consider. For one, whenever you ask the question, why didn't they come up with this earlier in history? The answer is, well, they didn't. It's just history took its course the way it did because of everything that happened before and because of socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, so on and so forth. There are good reasons. And in some cases, people were a little resistant to change, perhaps, or the ideas that they had about fighting at the time weren't really compatible with this new concept. Not every weapon in history and its design was always about what is better. Sometimes it was as simple as fashion. You know, this is what they liked at the time. Is it really better? Well, in some ways, obviously, yes. For example, a hanging guard is just less exposed. And you can, for example, even tilt your blade back and present the hilt without your hand being in danger. With an arming sword or a dussac or a variety of other swords, you have to really make sure when you throw the cut that you don't lead with your hand. If you throw the cut like this really severely endangers your hand. So you have to make sure that you lead with the point. With a guard like this, you don't have to worry so much about that. Now, personally, I haven't practiced with a basket-hilt sword. I've learned mainly longsword, dussac, and a little bit of Polish saber. So I don't know exactly how it's done in Scottish broadsword fencing, but you wouldn't need to make sure that you lead with the point. You could throw a cut leading with the hand. Now, you can argue that that's not as good for actual cutting as it is to actually lead with the blade, but you know, it opens up some more options. However, it also closes off some other options or makes them a little more awkward. For example, with an arming sword, you can, and most sabers, you can do this kind of wrist-powered cut quite easily. You can do that with a basket-hilt too, but it's a little more awkward because as you rotate, the edge of the guard here on the side is going to hit the wrist right there. So there's only so much you can rotate here. So it's not going to be as tight. I hope I can show that. So if I rotate here, this is as tight as I can make that wrist cut. With the arming sword, this is as tight as I can make that cut. So I can make it tight enough that I actually have to move my head out of the way. And then there's the thrust. Do you remember my video about the broken hand position? So a basket hilt kind of forces you to do that because you simply don't have enough space for a handshake grip like this. So with an arming sword or a side sword or rapier, you can grip it like this, and you can thrust more efficiently because of the alignment of your wrist. With the basket hilt, you're pretty much forced into a hammer grip. I seem to be forced to do more of a rising thrust or maybe come in from the side as opposed to doing this, because that leads to the broken wrist, which I don't really like. And also, since it is locked into a hammer grip, you don't get quite as much reach unless you overextend your wrist, which again is not good for your wrist. So you would be more limited to this kind of reach here. Whereas with the arming sword, I can cut just a little further out. And then you've got the issue of weight and balance. So obviously this is quite a bit of extra material. That's a lot of steel here on the guard. So it means that if you don't want to increase the overall weight of the sword compared to a different type, you would move the balance further back. So you would have more mass in the hilt compared to the blade, which means that it just doesn't cut as powerfully. It means you have more point control, which is good for thrusts, but we've already pointed out that thrusts aren't really the greatest with this. You can do it, but it's not optimized compared to, say, a side sword or a rapier. And so if you wanted to maintain the cutting ability of a different type of sword, you would have to also make the blade a little thicker, or give it less of a taper towards the point, so you have a bit more mass here and it's just more powerful in the cut. That means overall it's going to be heavier. So it means it's going to be more exhausting to use over longer periods of time, especially. With a simpler hilt, I have more wrist mobility and therefore more techniques at my disposal. Like some of the German master cuts, for example, the Zwerkhau, Schielhau. Those really don't work with a basket simply because of the sides of the guard. So if I try to do that, first off, I can't put the thumb on the blade, but even if I tried it without, it's simply not possible to execute, because you will notice in order to throw a cut like this, I have to switch my grip from this orientation to that to make that possible, which of course I cannot do here at all. Also, the bulk here poses some practical challenges. So for one, if you're carrying this on your hip, this is quite a massive object that rests on your side. So generally with something like this, the side profile is flat. So this doesn't stick out a whole lot, and the basket on the other hand does. Also, this is not as easy to draw as something with just a crossguard, say, because you have to actually bring your hand in there. So if you're suddenly attacked and you're suddenly under stress and your hand just may slap against the guard, and you have to go, oh crap. So this is just not quite as quick. This way, it doesn't even particularly matter how exactly you grab it, even if all you get is the pommel, say, you can still pull it out and then you adjust your grip and there you go. There can be a few admittedly rare instances where it can be an advantage to swap the sword from one hand to the other. If this arm gets injured, for example, that's the obvious one. You better be good with the left, of course, but what I consider more likely is if somebody comes in and tries to grapple and tries to control that arm, goes over to that side and makes sure you can't use this arm, you may still be able to switch over and then thrust while they're at it. So this, of course, is very easy with a sword like this. With this, not so much. You have to awkwardly snake your hand in there, and this is not fast, as you can tell. I mean, I suppose in that grappling scenario, if you absolutely had to, you could just grab the thing like this and stab them, which, in an emergency, if your life depends on it, in historical combat, you would of course do what you had to. But it is something to consider. There are always more things you can point out, but I think this serves to illustrate that it's not as simple as just saying, oh, this is better. Why didn't they do that always? Personally, I like this sword. I like how it handles. I like how it looks. The hand protection is nice, but as I said, it has its limitations. It's not perfect. Nothing ever is, and let's leave it at that. So thanks for watching.